Nigel is from Crisp Malting Group. Is that the proper name of it, I think. Yeah, so we've obviously previously had talks on sort of new yeasts and new hops and things like that. So, but I think at least in Britain, I feel we have the best malt in the world that's available to us. So I thought it'd be good to hear about some new malt products that have come onto the market, and essentially try and understand how best we should use them, what they can bring to the to your beer. So I got in contact with Crisp, and Nigel agreed to come along and talk to us about it. So the meeting format is going to kind of be, I obviously have already asked for questions, so I'll be showing those, and getting Nigel to talk about that a little bit. There is also a heritage malt booklet, which I put the PDF on our Slack area if you look in meetings. So you can go and look at that, and I'll be sort of showing that occasionally as well to sort of help illustrate what we're talking about. So yeah, that's it really. So Nigel, do you let me just show the slides quickly. There we go. So yeah, basically the sort of first thing really is just, can you just give us a quick background on you, on Crisp, sort of the where you are, what the current market is, and history, that sort of thing?
No, absolutely. I mean, first things first, thank you very much for inviting me along today. I'm very much from a sales and marketing background. I've got a marketing degree, but I've always been passionate about beer, particularly cask ale in the early days, growing up around Adnams and Green King, when Green King was an old-fashioned pint, let's say. But prior to that, I used to work with craft bakeries, but I could see the potential 20 years ago of the microbrewing revolution as I saw it. And of course, that's evolved to what some people describe as a craft beer renaissance. But I've always been big on quality, so I very much welcome the opportunity to come along and talk about the malt, because people do talk about the hops an awful lot, and quite rightly so. It's exciting, and a lot of them were very new. But to me and to Crisp, the malt is really the cornerstone of any great beer. It's got great history as well, and it's yeah, I think really it's down to us to make the effort to share that knowledge with you and that interest. So yeah, thanks very much first and foremost. So Crisp, we traditionally we were owned by the Smith family, who were farmers, and as was quite often the case, farmers built their own maltings, and we were heavily bombed in the Second World War, and you had a choice. You could either take the government money and close down, or you could take a reasonable amount of cash and reinvest. And the Smith family reinvested, and that's what we've done. So we have 5 sites in the UK, predominantly aimed at brewing, but also distilling up in Scotland, of course. We have 1 site in Germany, in Hamburg. That's pretty much all aimed at the big boys. So, very, very big batches aimed at the international brewers. And we also have a brewery in Bydgoszcz in Poland. The reason that we're located where we are in the UK is predominantly the whole East Coast strip, all the way from Kent, all the way up to the East Coast of Scotland. It's not great land, but it's very good land for growing barley, which is, as I'm sure you know, is effectively, it's a grass. It doesn't need very much rain, but it does need the rain at the right time, and it needs the sunshine at the right time. So that's why you'll see Crisp, you'll see us based in Great Ribur in Norfolk, and you'll see us up the East Coast further up, and also down in Suffolk as well. So it's also about the soil. We're a little bit different to other malters in that we do have about 30,000 tonnes of storage just off the M4 corridor. So barley can be grown in the Midlands. It can even be grown in Cornwall. But what that does give Crisp, it gives us an alternative. So if the crop fails in the east, then hopefully we might have got a decent crop in the Midlands. Current market, as I say, we do deal with the internationals, of course, but we also take the craft beer microbrewers very, very seriously, home and abroad. So we do export to America. It's really the Americans that sort of re-energized Maris Otter. So the microbrewers loved Maris Otter until they took on the first Wetherspoons contract or the first supermarket contract as they got bigger. And it was falling away because margins were thin on that business. But the Americans, sort of 15 years ago, really got behind the Maris Otter, and that really gave it a boost. So yeah, we sell all around the world, and this craft brewing revolution, for want of a better expression, is really being seen all over. We get inquiries from as far afield as Nepal, Ukraine, not so much now, of course, unfortunately, but literally all around the world, craft brewing, microbrewing is doing very well.
We've had at least one question from a member that's based in Australia. Yeah, it's it certainly goes a long way. So let me just move to the next slide. So yeah, let's talk about the heritage malts. So what are they, and why were they selected, and what's each best used for? I'm going to flick over and show the sort of booklet a bit as you're talking about each one at the moment.
Well, I love these. I love the history. I love the tradition, but I also love the flavors. So I think we're well aware that particularly in the 60s and 70s, the big boys produced some quality beers. They were very consistent, but they were not necessarily aimed at consumer satisfaction all of the time. Now, the Chevalier, that was the very first barley grown specifically for the UK brewing industry. That was in the 1800s, late 1800s. And it was actually grown about 10 miles from where I'm sitting by the Chevalier Aspel cider family. And as legend has it, the farmer was sitting down at his farmhouse table. He picked out these barley grains from his booth, and being a good old Suffolk boy like myself, nothing is wasted. He tasted them and he thought, bloody hell, that's really, really good. It was a very malty, intense flavour. And from those half a dozen grains, he propagated them up, and it became the #1 variety in UK brewing. And that's actually what we did. We went to the John Innes Centre, we propagated not the same half a dozen, but another half a dozen grains, and we built it up from there. But that's the Chevalier. The Plumage Archer is a little bit different. That was the first barley grown where, what was his name? I did write it down actually, I forgot his name, I knew that I would. But he took the best attributes of two barley varieties and cloned them together to produce a better product. The Hanna was grown in what is now the Czech Republic, Moravia from memory. And as the kilning methods changed, they were able to produce the lighter malts for the first time. They brewed the first Pilsner in the Czech Republic, and that was like the local variety. So they're the three main heritage ones. The Chevalier is really aimed more at traditional best bitters, traditional UK beers. You can produce the lighter beers, of course, and just with Maris Otter, I don't see any issue at all in producing a light hoppy beer using a Maris Otter or a Chevalier. I just think it just gives something to a beer, just some sort of body to the beer naturally. So I'm a massive fan of the Chevalier. The Plumage Archer, it tended to like lighter, chalkier soils, and looking at the technical analysis, it is a little bit lighter. But what I would say about both of those is that ideally the specification should be the same as standard Maris Otter or standard Best Ale, whether it be Flagon or Laureate, the modern varieties. The reason that you will see a difference on the analysis is because we floor malt everything. We floor malt the heritage range, and because we have less to choose from, we can't be quite so picky and quite so strict with the specifications. So you will see, like on the Chevalier, the color I think goes up to 10, which is 4 points higher than you would have with the Maris Otter.
I think you said before, one of the questions we had was about the plumage archer, because it was a bit lighter than the others. I think the same reason. So yeah, so you've also got the Hannah Malt and the number 19 Maris Otter.
Yes.
So you said the Hannah Malt is primarily for sort of lager styles.
Yeah, predominantly for the pilsners.
Okay, and the number 19 Maris Otter, is it the difference there that it's just been floor malted, or is there?
That's correct. Yeah, we have one floor maltings, Great Ryborough, and it is an authentic floor maltings. We do have air conditioning now, which you wouldn't have had in Victorian times, but it is the original building set against the prevailing winds. So traditionally, you would open the loo with, like the windows to cool it down, and when it gets colder, you would couch the malt up to generate the heat naturally. So it is authentic floor malt, and we produce 20 tons at a time, but we can box off 5 tons at a time on the floors.
Excellent. Okay.
Just one final point I could make about these is the reason that you don't tend to see them, or why you didn't see them for many years, is because the bigger breweries, the bigger distillers, it really was all about extract. Whereas both when you're brewing with the heritage varieties, but also when you're growing them as a farmer, the yields are well down. You can be looking at least 2 tons difference per acre, but when the farmer's growing it. So that's massive, and that's why they're all grown under contract, like Maris Otter. That they're also the stalks were not particularly wind resistant. They used to blow over very easily, and of course the combines couldn't quite pick it all up like modern combines. So it's not because they weren't good, it's just that the extracts were not as impressive as they could be, and because you couldn't always get down low enough to harvest it effectively.
So it's kind of issues of modern efficiency and rather than flavour, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. So then the next question then is I guess we'll just go through them sort of one by one. Like what is their best use, and sort of how do they need to be treated any differently? That the sort of thing I've had questions about are kind of like, do you need to do step mashes, or is there a sort of ideal mash schedule for them, that sort of thing? So I guess starting with the Chevalier.
I guess I would always advise you look at the certificate of analysis, because there is less grown. You will see like the nitrogens are a little bit higher, and the colour can be a little bit higher. So in the case of the Chevalier, I think it's fair to say that you would mash it at a lower temperature for longer. I think my colleague recommended 90 minutes, so a little bit longer there.
And so sort of instead of normally, I guess you'd be sort of 66, 67, so you'd be sort of like a couple of degrees lower, or?
Yeah, something like the 65, because even a degree can make a difference, as you know. But because everybody's brewery kit can be a little bit different, I say my default answer is quite often bear in mind what I've just said, but always look at the certificate of analysis, because a lot of people don't. And particularly because there will be those fluctuations with the smaller batches, then yeah, I just think you have to be vigilant.
We'll go through the certificate analysis in a little bit, I think, so that would be interesting as well. Okay, so Chevalier kind of give it a bit more effort to help it convert, and mash it a little lower then.
Yeah, and it will bring out the color. It needs that to get the color to come through.
Oh yeah, we've got the a few specs on Chevalier there as well. So it's a good booklet, this one, to download and have a look at. I noticed also you got some recipes in here that are they on the Crisp website?
They should be. They should be. There's a lot of good information on there if you want to dig deeper down into all of these.
Okay.
Also
Plumage.
today is two of my colleagues are attending BrewCon, which I believe is this weekend. So
Okay.
I apologies. I think it's fair to say they're more gifted technically than myself. So if I'm not able to answer any questions, I will be pleased to take any down afterwards and either get back to you individually or by all means speak to Colin Johnson and Mike Benson down at BrewCon if you're attending.
Cool. Plumage Archer. How best to handle this?
Yeah, it's well, the nitrogens tend to be a little bit higher again. I sent some analysis over for you, recent batches, and you will see that it tends to be a slightly lighter color, and because it's a different variety, they tend to be used for the lighter beers, the hoppier beers, than maybe the Chevalier. Again, I think it's down to personal choice. I don't see any issue why Chevalier can't be used for a lighter beer. I don't see why you can't use Plumage Archer for a darker beer. It's I think providing the beer is well brewed, then they're very flexible.
And in terms of the sort of, again, is it just a bit more effort to convert than a modern malt? So similar to the Chevalier.
It's similar to the Chevalier, yeah. Having said that, the one thing about the Marisotta, which whatever age the brewer is, they've always really liked the Marisotta because it's very forgiving in the mash tun. So it's not necessarily a traditional versus a modern. But that is one thing that they've always said about the Marisotta. It is very forgiving. So as I say, to go back to what I've said, just look at the certificate and treat it accordingly.
Okay. And then we've got the, I'll try and move on a page. There we go. The Hannah malt. So this mentions step or decoction brewing.
I think this year decoction has really been the way to go. The nitrogens were high. I don't have the spec in front, the analysis for that in front of me, but it was higher this year. And for people on a traditional regime, it did create problems. Whereas with the decoction, they brewed some very good beers. I believe had a look at it. Harbour had a look at it, and they were very pleased with the results. But it is more difficult. In a normal year, a good year, then you can use a traditional British regime. But yeah, this year was a little bit challenging for that.
What would be the sort of problems you'd see from a high nitrogen level?
I think it was just getting it to drop.
Okay, so
and it was just
clarity
taking a lot longer than it should, and
not there's no issues in sort of conversion or efficiency or anything like that then?
No.
Okay.
So what does the level of nitrogen do to the grain, and how does that affect the brewing? And I'm not sure I considered nitrogen before.
I was going to say clarity, which of course is a moot point depending upon what you're trying to achieve these days, but certainly to get it to clear to a certain extent the flavor, because I think traditionally with a British beer, you don't really want, a professional brewer won't want the nitrogen higher than a 1.65, and they don't really like it lower than like a 1.4. Whereas with the Hannah this year, it was getting beyond that, and that was creating issues in getting it to drop clear, providing they wanted it to drop clear, but also in the time frame.
Is there anything you can do in the mash to sort out the clarity if you've got too much nitrogen in your grain?
Yeah, I mean, Murphy's do a very good product called Claret.
Uh-huh. So just normal clarification agents, as it were.
Yeah, and that's definitely an option.
Okay, thanks.
I think also the mashing temperatures, but I'd rather, because I'm not a brewer, I'd try not to give too much advice. So they want to give you the wrong advice.
Thanks.
And I assume then for the number 19 Marisotta, it's just treat it like regular Marisotta then.
Absolutely. I mean, I love floor malt. If you imagine like when you're cooking a joint of beef, or if you're cooking or baking a loaf of bread using a traditional sponge dough where you leave some sponge and add it the following day, you imagine all of those marvelous flavors maturing, coming together, taking their time, not being rushed. That's what good floor malt can do. It takes as long as it takes to be right. And if it takes another couple of days, 3 days, so be it. With a lot of modern processes, it's very consistent. Like we have the regular quote modern mirror image maltings. Very, very good, very, very consistent. But the floor maltings, if it's done properly, and I've drunk some very good floor malted beers, or beers using floor. Again, I think it can bring something to the table that is different, that you can discern as a different. Conversely, if you imagine that the malts that his wife might have left him, or the bloody dog might have bitten his leg, he's just having a bad day, because it's not a consistent product, you could see inconsistencies. But good floor malt is a wonderful product.
Excellent. Okay. So I had a few specific questions about
And also
malt.
be very consistent, by the way. So to answer your question, it should match the technical parameters of, or it can match the technical parameters from the regular malt. But again, because it is on the floors, it can just vary a little bit.
Adds character.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I had one specific question about the Plumage Archer, saying it was slightly lighter, which you mentioned earlier on. So is there a good way to change it to a slightly darker or more of an amber malt to use in milds and porters? If we're doing that, what would be a good oven temperature and duration to toast it? Is there anything else we need to consider? Certainly from my point of view, I'm used to, when I started homebrewing, I don't know if you still can, but there used to be such a thing as mild malt, which was just a little bit darker, a little bit sweeter.
That's right. Yeah, I haven't seen, well, I shouldn't use the word authentic. I haven't seen a traditional mild malt for a long, long time. I think what probably happened was one or two of the maltsters used like a standard malt, but at the top end of the spec. Traditionally, a mild malt, as you say, would have been something that was malted specifically as a mild malt. I think you could say the same with a brown malt. I think that used to come from, was it cedarwood, smoked cedarwood, whereas now it's not. In terms of producing those products, some brewers would add a little bit of chocolate. Some might use a little bit of amber. Oh yeah, I did write a note actually. Where did I write a note?
Well, I did get an email from your colleague as well about this, saying to make amber malt, the malts would roast malt at around 120 degrees for 30 to 40 minutes to develop color and flavor, but
Right.
all the enzymes would be deactivated. However, doing this at home is tricky and a fire risk, so we would not recommend it.
Right. Well, our peated malt plant went up in flames after less than a year. Yeah, Muntins, Bridlington, that went up in. Honestly, we've had half a dozen fires in the industry just in the last 2-3 years, I think. So yeah, you do genuinely have to be very, very careful.
Yeah. I mean, well, I get there's homebrewers do plenty of things that are a fire risk sometimes. So, okay. So, sorry, you said there was actually interesting thing about that. You're saying about the mild malt would have actually been malted specifically for that, rather than just being a bit darker. Would it be using the same sort of? Would it still be using the standard sort of barley variety?
Yeah, a mild malt would. A mild malt would. Yeah.
Okay. Move on to the next one. On Chevalier, person said, in my experience, it is less bready stroke biscuity than Marisotta, and described as having a marmalade sweetness, which I don't get. Am I missing something, treating it wrongly?
Not in my opinion. I've never tasted marmalade, I must admit, but people's palates do differ. And this might be one of your later questions, but I've tasted Chevalier as a grain and been really impressed. And I haven't met a brewer that hasn't been impressed tasting it as a grain. They really have stated that it does seem more intense than Marisotta, that it is more malty and biscuity. And I personally do get that, but I've never got a marmalade sweetness, I must admit.
Okay.
But could I just ask a question there?
Yeah, sure.
When you say tasted it as a grain, are you talking about having a mouthful of the dry product, or are you talking about after a mash and tasting the first runnings?
No, this is as a malted grain I've tasted it. But I've also we also made up some malted teas. What did we do? We did Marisotta, Chevalier, and I think it was the Plumage Archer. But they were all distinctly different, both as a malted grain, but also as a malted tea. And it's a wonderful thing to do to make up those teas, because it really strips it bare, and you can, it really has an opportunity to show itself off as a barley variety. It's good fun as well.
So how would you go about making those malt teas? Just steep some malt, or?
Yeah, effectively. I mean, to be honest, I left that to somebody else. But what would be nice was perhaps you could all come over to Ryborough one day, and we could make some malt teas up for you.
That'd be good.
Yeah, have a tour of the facility, look at because it's an incredible site. We've got the red blood qualls, we've got the floor maltings, but we've also got the new. I shouldn't call them the twin towers, but it's the new roasting plant, which is 2 towers, where each grain is roasted individually as it travels up a spiral, and whereas traditionally it would be like a roasting drum. So if you're interested in malting and brewing, it's a fascinating site to visit. And, yeah, we can make up some malt teas.
That'd be very interesting. Okay, I mean, it's interesting. So it's kind of, that's a valid way. Is that sort of how people would normally evaluate a malt with a malt tea, or is there any other sort of ways you can do it? Short of brewing an entire batch with it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the bigger breweries would be regularly producing malt teas. Tasting the grains definitely gives you an indication. But and then I think a lot of the bigger breweries, tell me if I'm wrong, but then maybe the focus is more on evaluating the actual beer as opposed to looking at the individual barley varieties.
Okay. So yeah, we one question about reading a malt spec sheet. Now I know you sent through the certificate of analysis earlier on for a couple of them. Is that a different thing, or is that something we should be sort of looking at?
I think the best thing, I mean, the certificate of analysis is what you actually get. So you'll see in the booklet, you'll see like the typical analysis, and that's what we would typically hope to achieve. But when you receive a certificate, which I believe I sent you for the Chevalier and the Plumage, that's what you physically get. So it's always worth referring to that. And if you do deal with the Malt Miller or Charles Farehams, then I believe they can supply you with that information.
And is there any, what will we be looking at on this to sort of learn something about it? When obviously you've mentioned already the nitrogen level. Is there anything else that we should be interested in on this?
I think the way I've always viewed it is, if we've done our job properly, then you should just be able to brew with it in the normal way. If the nitrogens are higher, then you might well adapt the mash temperature down. The same with the color. If the color looks a little bit light or a little bit high, then you might just consider, like if it's too high, you might consider taking out a little bit of the chocolate malt or the crystal malt, maybe use a lower crystal to bring the color down. Equally, you can put a bit more crystal in, or totally dependent upon what you're brewing, of course. But I think the thing is to, you know, just treat these certificates seriously, because not everybody pays attention to them. What I can also point you towards, which will be on the website, is there is, I can't remember whether it was a blog or actually a webinar we did, which actually talks through the certificate of the analysis, and that would be worth looking at.
Okay. I'm just taking a quick note on that. Okay.
Sorry, James, just a question.
Go on, Serge.
Bothers me quite often when I look at these. Quite often I don't really know how to convert from liters degrees per kilogram into gravity points. Any thoughts, any ideas on what's the maths?
We can send something over to you. I believe there is a calculation chart again on the website. So if you look at the Crisp website, if it's not on there, and I'm pretty sure it is, if it's not on there, I'll leave my email at Crisp Malt, and if you require that chart, I'm sure I could get something sent through to you.
Yeah, it would be grand, because you know, I use a fair bit of Crisp Malts, but also other maltsters, and I appreciate that commercial, professional brewers understand these numbers and this is what they work with. But you know, for us homebrewers, you know, standard gravity points are just much easier to understand what the potential of the grain is, if it's, you know, 35, 37, etc. Whereas, you know, liters degrees per kilogram would just be like, what?
Yeah, absolutely. Now have a look at the website, but I'll also investigate that. And if you'd like, if you leave your email address, if you're happy to give it out through James, then I'll I'll gladly.
Like, I'm sure there is an equation for it, which doesn't need a chart sort of thing. But what I don't know what the equation is.
Right.
Yeah, because it's normally the I mean, the homebrew stuff is all done in like gravity points per gallon. Although to be fair, for everything else I do is like all in metric. So sort of switching between.
But like, you know, homebrew software doesn't take these numbers. You have
it doesn't work in Plato and and the metric sort of versions like the pro brewers do. I got a feeling that was that last question. Oh no, we got so there was some more general questions around malts and things like that. So away from the heritage malts. So what's the newest innovations in malts? Is there anything else interesting on its way or just come to the market?
It's not really a malt, but we've got chip malt at the moment. So if you don't, which is pretty much like a raw barley, which people are using to give body and foam, but you don't always want that flavour. So chip malt's doing very well.
Okay, I know it's other maltsters have done things like the sort of double roasted crystal and things like that, which is kind of new. Is there anything else potentially on the way in the future, or?
It's gone a little bit quiet recently. So we've had. I think we're just incredibly busy. We're selling all of the malt that we can produce, having to try and keep it a little bit simple. But if any of your members have got it, sorry, excuse me. Any good ideas, things that we should be looking at. So we did have a new product development team looking at things. I know that the smooth chocolate was very well received, low color chocolate, things like that. But now we have the RevTech. It does give us the ability to create smaller batches and to be more innovative. Even naked grains as well can go through the RevTech, which it wouldn't go through a traditional drum. So yeah, if you have any good ideas, then we will look at it for sure.
Does Crisp produce a Munich or Vienna type malt?
Yeah, we do the Munich and the Viennas. So they're like a stewed product.
Would you know the reason why? I mean, I often hear it said that when you buy British grown versions of malts like Munich and Vienna, that you should use much lower concentrations of them in your mash. Like so supposedly you use like Weyermann's Munich, you can make 100% Munich beer. And I once attempted this with a British grown Munich. I went up to 70% and it was horribly cloying. And I just wondered whether you knew why that would be. Is it something to do with the terroir or nitrogen levels you get, or I mean, I've no idea myself.
Yeah, I mean, I get what you say about the cloy, because normally people would use what, sort of 10% Munich, sort of in the area, sometimes less than that, of course. 70% is an awful lot. There are different levels of Munich malt, and without knowing what you used against what the Weyermann's product was, it's difficult to say. I mean, if you've got it on record anywhere, by all means ping it over to me and I can investigate further. But without knowing like for like, it's a difficult one to answer. But it's 70%. I would expect it to have some sort of impact in terms of drinkability, but it can be done. I have heard it being done. So, but yeah, if you've got any records you can forward, I'll look into it closer by all means.
All right, that's the end of the questions that were submitted in advance. I mean, no, actually, talk about innovation and things like that, or other things that you're interested in. I mean, the one thing I was kind of interested in, I don't know whether it's something Crisp would do, would be other sort of cereals for brewing. So other kinds of, I know that we occasionally use a bit of flake maize or something like that in a beer, but there are other kinds of maize, I mean, available internationally, sort of purple corn and things like that, that would be interesting to try in certain beers. Probably not going to be a big seller, but I'm interested in them. And similar sort of thing with oats. So you get sort of the giant and malted oats and things like that. It's another one sort of that might get a bit more interest. So those are the sorts of things I'm interested in. Less sort of I'm interested in the heritage malts of barley, but certainly I'm always interested in trying other kinds of cereal and things like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, MFP has been quite exciting for us, because again, it makes us a little bit different from other maltsters. But yeah, but the wheat bringing sweetness, the oats giving a smoothness to the stouts. A lot of the London brewers are using an awful lot of oats these days, whether they be naked oats or flaked oats, torrefied wheat, maize. A lot of people are using rice, and sometimes it's for head retention or for body smoothness. But again, it's something a lot of in the traditional brewing, there is probably quite a bit of snobbery about using adjuncts, unmalted products. But again, when we made up some malt teas a few years ago with the maize and the rice, yeah, it was just incredibly drinkable. And you could really see how it could just bring something different.
Has anyone else got any other questions for Nigel?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go on, Nick. Go again.
I put it in the chat earlier just as a note to myself. Like I buy a lot of crisp malt, and one of the reasons that I do that is because it seems, well, it is cheaper than anybody else's malt. I just wonder whether there's a particular reason for that, whether whether that's a marketing reason, or whether that's down to, like, just the margins. And if I want to buy something like Warminster floor malt, I mean, you're getting up nearly £40 a bag. But for crisp, it's about 32, 33 now from the malt miller. I was just interested to know how you managed to keep the crisp prices down, as it were.
It's probably because I feel embarrassed by my lack of technical knowledge. It's the only way I can sell anything. But no, the honest answer is, I mean, comparing with Warminster, they are a floor maltings, and anything which is labour intensive. You'll see from our number 19 against the standard Marisotta, it's like £100 a tonne difference. And of course, Warminster, I think they only produce 2,000 or 3,000 tonnes a year, whereas obviously, we're a lot bigger than that. But yeah, I guess a bit against our bigger competitors, I think we're comparable. Quite often we're more expensive because we do take quality very seriously. A lot of our barley's the heritage, the Marisotta, it's all grown under contract, and we are prepared to pay premiums. We even paid a premium on Flagon, which is another winter variety. Again, the yield wasn't great in the field, but our customers liked it. And so we said, okay, we're prepared to pay more if you carry on growing it. So we are very big on quality. We have very strong relationships with the ABC group, and they're the group that actually have, they describe it as the mother field in Norfolk. And every year they actually go into this small field and they hand pick the purest grains of Marisotta. Because what happens, because otter-like plumage is one of two varieties, the parent. And if you imagine you're a farmer, you think, oh, I'll just save a bit of money this year. Money's a little bit tight. But the longer you leave it without buying the purest grain, it splits back into the original parentage. So it's no longer pure Marisotta. So we try to ensure that we work with the professionals in their field. What I will say is, if you've always grown barley, although it's a lot cheaper, a lot easier to grow rape or just the feed barley as an example, it's a lot less husbandry, there's a lot less risk. If you go to the local maltings and if your malting barley fails, that's your profit gone. But these guys do take genuine pride in growing the very best barley, and they're the sort of people that we want to associate with. So to answer your question, yes, we are more expensive than the floor malt from Warminster, but that's only because they're labour intensive. Against our closer opposition, we're comparable stroke more expensive because we won't ever budge on quality.
I have a question, Nigel, about the weather this year. You mentioned earlier that part of the country where you grow, and you have a bit down the West Country and a bit further up north as a backup. How did the weather, the lack of rain and that amount of heat affect the harvest / prices for next year? Because you were saying that barley relies on specifically rain at the right time.
Yeah, you need, whether it's a winter or a spring, you need to be able to drill. You need to put the new grain into the ground, and that has been an issue and has become an increasing issue in recent times. Once it gets into the grain, barley is quite robust and it can recover. But then, like all plants, it can become heat stressed. in Norfolk, they seem to get some pretty decent heavy showers, which help them throughout the year. But it was still a tough year, and I believe some of the grains look quite skinny. But overall, the nitrogens are probably just below middle, I believe, for the specification. So, but the yields may be a little bit down, but they are still analysing it. On further down in Suffolk, I mean, until today and yesterday, I think in the last 3 months, we've probably had, to my knowledge, probably less than an hour's rain. And the other issue is they like to put nitrogen onto the field. If you put the nitrogen on and then it doesn't rain, then it can go in the wrong direction in the plant. So you have to be very, very careful to make sure that you apply it. And if you don't then get the rain to get it to go down into the root, then you know, you're wasting an awful lot of money, and you're not going to get those bold grains. You're not going to get the yield.
So you must have you've harvested this year from this summer, I guess.
We have.
How did it look? I sound like I'm a farmer now. How did it look? I've got no idea.
No, well, it looks pretty good. I mean, you also mentioned the price increases. I honestly don't know at this point. I've heard plus £200 a tonne. I even heard plus £3. My opinion is I try to ignore the future markets, which is a bit like stocks and shares, until the actual trading begins, where barley is being shifted and brewers are buying it. That's the reality of the situation. Like, let the money men get on with it and do their own thing. I think in about 2, hopefully 3 weeks' time, we'll actually have some real numbers that I would be looking. I would say a minimum £200 a tonne, even though we only buy about 5% of gas from Russia, I believe. It's all of these knock-on effects.
I was going to ask, has that had an effect on the homegrown product in any way?
Well, I think only in as much as if we have a good harvest, other nationalities will want British barley. So we traditionally we use all of the barley that we grow, and we can export. But there will be pressures, I'm sure, from things eased up in Ukraine, didn't it? They opened up the shipping lane, but I think they only were getting 70% out that they were hoping to achieve. So although it was a big step forward, it's still not great. So it could be that the French, the Germans, or whoever else might actually want some British grain, and that will also help drive the price up. And also the farmers, just with the greenhouse thing in general, farmers have so many things they can grow which are easier to grow. You know, they're constantly pushing up.
Thanks.
Any other questions? No? All right. Well, thank you very much, Nigel, for coming on and talking to us about that. That's really interesting, and certainly I'm going to be trying out some of the heritage malts on the next brews I do. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, Dan. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks a lot.
And if you have any questions to say, either through James or direct to Chris, you know, please let us have them, and we're always pleased to help brewers. But thank you very much for the invite.
Thank you. Yeah, and hopefully we can maybe organise that tour at some point. So
Please,
yeah,
you'd be very welcome.
that'd be great. Cool.
Have a good evening, guys.
All right. Thank you, Nigel. Cheers.
Bye-bye.